Hi, this is Lex, and welcome to the Fintech Blueprint. It's your podcast about fintech, decentralized finance, digital banking, investing, robo-advice, artificial intelligence, and all the other frontier technology that is transforming financial services. To get more content, like an illustrated transcript of this conversation in your inbox, subscribe at fintechblueprint.com. So without further delay, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's conversation. I'm thrilled to have with us today Dan Finlay and Dean Tribble. Dan is a co-founder of MetaMask, the leading crypto wallet, and Dean is the CEO of Agoric, one of the most interesting technology companies in the Web3 space. We've had both of them on before, but we're going to have a really fascinating discussion about the future of wallet strategy, the type of developments that builders can add now to MetaMask, as well as what kind of underlying technological changes we're seeing across all of Web3. So with that, Dan and Dean, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, Lex. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us here. This is great.
My pleasure. All right, Dan, let's start with just checking in on how MetaMask is doing. Where are we? It's 2023, towards the end of it. I think everybody's waiting with bated breath for the Bitcoin ETF, but there's been some destruction along the way. How is the usage going? How is the wallet doing? What do you see from your vantage point?
Yeah, I think that anyone in the Web3 space can feel that it feels like we're almost on this cusp of something like, there's been a lot of kind of inactivity, or not inactivity, but there haven't been major phase shifts in a while. The biggest thing that kind of happened in the Ethereum space this year was the release of EIP 4337 or EIP, which lets us have kind of contract accounts that are a little bit easier to write, but those are kind of still trying to find their footing. But it has enabled some new applications that are a little bit easier to get into. And there seems to be a lot of potential around there, but I think that it hasn't been quite realized. So I think for the most part, the Web3 ecosystem is kind of a core group of usage. It's still, I think we have something like 20 million regular users, but that's probably the same 20 million that we had a year and a half ago or something. So there hasn't been like a new huge viral wave in a little bit. And so I think that a lot of the ecosystem is kind of waiting for like either what is the use case that is the next phase shift, or I think what is the like enabling primitive or technology that suddenly makes this whole thing a lot easier to build on, safer to build on, more engaging for end users. And I think that is the kind of foundation building mindset that's motivating a lot of our current work at MetaMask and our collaborations with Agoric, actually, to kind of start to tie it back.
That philosophy has also led you to develop MetaMask in a way that's very differentiated from other wallets in the space. Can you talk about what are the core dimensions in which you've tried to grow the wallet, and Consensus more generally has supported the wallet in its growth? And then what have you been working on with Agoric, and why have you been working on it?
Yeah. So I guess historically, if I was going to try to put a net over the philosophy that's distinguished us so far, is that I think we've been kind of ruthlessly user-centric. A lot of features that someone might naively request might simply require a new centralized database. And so there are features out there where it's like, oh, well, it would be really easy to do that. Let's say auto detect all NFTs or something. But we were very early to recognize that auto detecting all NFTs is a huge abuse vector. And so actually we were trying to take a somewhat more nuanced approach to what is the kind of user consentful interaction here. And I think that we started to model all of these things as this kind of acts of user consent. And so while it started with token allowances when you connect to a website, that philosophy of what is the user consentful answer to this question, I think has kind of permeated the fibers of the MetaMask code base and has extended to the point where now we're starting to say, okay, what does it mean to let a user extend almost any part of the wallet, at runtime with third-party code, and, as long as they choose to. And we're trying to find what's the right balance of letting users do whatever they want and trying to hold their hand to keep them safe. But that guiding principle of user consent first, and also trying to lean off of obligating users to third-party services that they maybe know nothing about and might actually expose them to risks that they're not aware of. Like a auto-detected NFT may just seem like a harassment vector to a naive person, but we've got fantastic support data, and we know that there are active phishing campaigns that utilize a lot of these features. And while some of these kinds of things that a new wallet may find a naively obvious differentiator, we know at scale is actually something that puts your users at major harm. And so we actually have to play a kind of different game than most other wallets.
One of the things that always stood out to me about MetaMask is its focus on developers and its focus on safety. And so you had described that another wallet might say, okay, let's wrap around the most attractive design around NFTs and pipe in, some APIs from centralized providers. But that actually doesn't solve the problem, which is the problem of safety and security that you talk about. But it doesn't also solve the broader problem of we don't yet really know what Web3 is for. I mean, we know some things that it's good at and some things that are exciting for a couple of years. But there is a much more general question of you've got this economic system. It keeps creating weird, viral, and interesting things. And you have to build not just an answer to some particular feature question, but you have to build a more generalized platform or framework for integrating new things as they come up. With that color, could you talk about Snaps and what Snaps is? And then maybe also a question for Dean in terms of how Agoric has worked with MetaMask to build out that framework and support it.
Yeah. Thanks. That's such a great lead in. You could have been writing my own thoughts for me, because like really one of the things, like it's very easy to say, oh, okay, what's Web3 good for? Well, let's look at the biggest use cases today. It's DeFi, speculation, and NFTs. And then you can build a wallet around those three things. And we've seen wallets, basically do that and make the most polished DeFi NFT experience they can with wonderful onboarding. And I think that we've actually seen like what the upper limit of success with that strategy is. But the kind of problem, and I think kind of the elephant in the room here, is that the thing that one of the major things that makes Web3 interesting is the fact that it is a permissionlessly innovative space. So the thing that makes it interesting is partly that you don't know what's going to come next on it. So, you can make some NFT that represents membership for your club, and it may just be a cute, joke the first day. And then the next day, one of your members may, make a Dropbox that lets you pick up gifts if you have them or something. And so the fact that people can add new things dynamically is what makes the whole thing fun and interesting. And so if you just make a wallet that's only good at viewing your NFTs, you're not going to have that kind of spontaneous kind of discovery. So there's this question, how do you make a wallet that's capable of letting a person interact with applications that utilize things they had in one application in new ways that they maybe nobody knows about today? And so that means that we need to take the wallet's kind of main job is hold the user's keys and inform them about what they're doing with them. And so what we kind of need is we need a way of expanding the set of things we can inform the user about. And so if in the case of like opening a Clubhouse box or, having a subscription or something, that's a new kind of protocol basically. And so there's this question, how should you add that to the wallet and how should that become socialized throughout the ecosystem? And today the norm is go beg the most popular wallet developers to all standardize around it. And hopefully they all meet, in person and then argue for a while and then eventually converge on a kind of mediocre API that nobody's perfectly happy with, but everyone's exhausted arguing about. And then, we live on that for 5 years because nobody can break the API. What we've done instead is we've built a plugin system into the wallet, and we've done it using Agoric's sandboxing, hardened JS sandboxing technology. And it lets people add plugins to their wallet. And those plugins can actually add APIs to the website. So now if you have an NFT one day and then the next day someone comes up with a fun Dropbox service for it or, a Clubhouse feature, they could make a snap for that now gives you a very coherent, readable way of interacting with that new service around Web3. That's a pretty contrived off-the-cuff example. Concretely, what we're seeing is a lot of support for new blockchains. getting built. We're seeing support for new account types like contract accounts, MPC accounts. And then we also made an API to encourage the creation of security providers. So people can now add comprehensions to other transactions. So you can install a whole bunch of security providers. And now when you do something, you'll have a kind of a few security professionals looking over your shoulder and chiming in. And each one of these is just like one way that we're able to expand the wallet, all thanks to having this foundation of this extensible kernel at the middle of the wallet. And so that lets the wallet be a lot more flexible and dynamic, just like the underlying blockchain is. And I think one of our basic theses now is that you can't make a fully engaging wallet for a permissionless ecosystem unless that wallet interface itself is also permissionless. There's going to be a weakest link kind of problem.
We'll talk about the analogy of the App Store and what's happened with other ecosystems that really benefited from the strategy. But it all sounds a bit like magic. So for the less technical listener, question to Dean, what does any of that mean? How is it possible that you could have a wallet that is meant to, support Ethereum and EVM all of a sudden support Solana or Bitcoin? Where does JavaScript come into it? What's going on?
So yeah, JavaScript, it controls trillions of dollars every day. It's the most popular language on the planet. There was a paper that our chief scientist, Mark Miller, wrote, published 2013, 2015, one of those two, I don't remember, called Distributed Electronic Rights in JavaScript, where it both painted the picture of, sovereign services or this was pre-chain, of course, but sovereign services communicating with secure protocols in order to accomplish decentralized finance. But at the same time, it showed what features needed to be in JavaScript so that you could safely do smart contracts that way. And we'd worked for a long time in various venues on how do you do safe sandboxing? How do you do strong confinement, as it's formally called, strong sandboxes with limited authority? Hey, you can sign with my key, but you can't get at Joe's key. You can't get to the network. And so the architecture of that has been reasonably well understood. There's a secure operating system thread of design in the operating systems, Kikos, Eros, Kyotos, SEL4, which is the current number one secure OS on the planet, the Midori operating system that I worked on at Microsoft, are all designed around this model of pretty much object-oriented programming, but patterns for how to make that secure. And by driving the right things into JavaScript, you could use those patterns in JavaScript to be able to do strongly confined JavaScript. So what that means is anyone could submit to me JavaScript that does whatever they want, and I get to run it in a sandbox where it can only do a limited number of things, like it can only access their wallet. And now if they want to run code that does stuff to their wallet, that's fine. It can't bother Dan's wallet, right? It can't break into your wallet. It can't steal my keys. It can't do all these things. That's what confinement means, what people loosely now refer to as sort of generally sandboxing. And so fundamentally, in the same way that our websites are extended with JavaScript, so you get this rich, growing expressiveness in applications on the web, being able to add that same kind of extensibility will give that same kind of flexibility for the financial and Web3 integration. But obviously, we all believe that the secure confinement, the safe running of those extensions is even more critical in the Web3 world because, of course, it has access to your keys, it has access to your wealth and to your assets. And so you want to combine, when people want to combine essentially the ability to have fun and play games with access to all of their money at some level, you really need that strong confinement. That was what the hardened JavaScript that we built, set out to do. It's now used, and that's JavaScript standards track, right? A lot of this hardened JavaScript was originally designed for Web 2. It was designed with brokerage firms and Salesforce and Node.js Foundation and all these people that have the same kinds of concerns around being able to safely run third-party code with limited access to specific resources. And that happens in Web 2 all the time. So this was being developed in the JavaScript standards community. And we figured out in 2018 how to get over the line, how to go from, okay, JavaScript is kind of this malleable underpinning, so it's like building on quicksand, to harden that and lock it down so it's like building on concrete. And from there, it's now been adopted in various Web 2 platforms. It is the standard for embedded systems JavaScript. It is, of course, what Agoric uses to enable Web 2 JavaScript developers to be able to build software for Web 3 and build smart contracts in Web 3 in JavaScript using their existing tools. And of course, it's used for extensibility in MetaMask. I wanted to comment on something that Dan was saying with respect to that. For one of the big log jams that having an extensible wallet breaks is every time there was a new feature, a new idea on the blockchain, you had to simultaneously upgrade the blockchain and upgrade the wallets. And we have now moved from the myth that there will be a single blockchain worldwide to there now people realizing that there are hundreds of them, many of them all connected with interop protocols such that you can smoothly move between them, except that the wallet experience did not support that. And the problem was having to upgrade all those chains and the wallet at the same time was, of course, seriously problematic. And so one of the key things that extensibility in the wallet does is it breaks that coupling, where now if I've got a great idea, I can enhance my chain, get support in the wallet using a snap, and gradually spread the idea to other chains. Or I can add the idea into the wallet and inspire people to integrate that feature into their chains. And so those are all things that just making extensibility easier on one side or the other suddenly breaks that coupling and makes innovation much faster.
That's fascinating stuff. And I guess I still am trying to grasp a bit more in terms of what it means to empower somebody to use JavaScript to build on MetaMask. One of the narratives around any technological theme, not just crypto, but whether it's crypto or AI, is getting more developers to build more applications, therefore making the ecosystem more vibrant and have more features and so on and so forth. And one of Web3's biggest sort of indicators that people watch is the number of developers that are able to build in the space. Does this development open things up? Does it make it easier for people to create apps? And if so, can you give me a profile or an example of a developer that could do something new, that could pick up a project and add something in that wasn't possible before?
You could extend the wallet with any language you want. And I think, any language that you had safe confinement over. And so I think that first and foremost, if we're talking about extending the wallet, there's a lot of people that they'd learn any language if it meant they could get in the most popular wallet, right? But I mean, heck, people are learning Solidity to be on the most popular blockchain, right? So there's some precedent that people will jump over really heavy burdens just because it's to their benefit. But by being in JavaScript, there's a couple of nice things that happen. One is that it's the language the rest of our wallets already built in. Two, yes, it is the most popular language in the world. So, I think Dean would know the number. What is it, like 20 million JavaScript developers or something?
Yeah, depending, somewhere between 14 and 20. Yeah.
Yeah. So that definitely helps too. But I think that there's two other features of this sandboxing technology in particular I'd like to point out is that many sandboxing technologies are actually really heavyweight, like both in how to use it and on the computer. Like today, I think there's almost two ways of running software for a consumer. Either you're just double clicking some file you downloaded, in which case, you might be owned. And so you better just trust whoever sent it to you. Or you're a sysadmin and you're running Docker and you're basically spinning up a individual Linux environment per application just so that you can have something resembling confinement around it. And so there isn't really any consumer grade, lightweight sandbox today. And so what Agoric has done is they've actually made this really, really lightweight. It's implemented within the syntax of the JavaScript language itself. And I think the other nice thing is it doesn't introduce a bunch of new config files and pseudo languages or something. It's actually implemented in a subset of JavaScript. So I think sometimes, Dean says, oh yeah, it's JavaScript. It's the most popular language. But I think there's a lot of begrudging usage of JavaScript out there. I think some people, they say, oh, JavaScript, you go on Hacker News, people kind of love to hate it. I don't think everyone even knows why they hate it. But, there's vague notions of, like,
I feel like it goes nested HTML tables, and then it goes CSS, and then it goes mouse over JavaScript, right?
Right.
That's sort of like...
And people remember JavaScript from 10 years ago that had various issues that have all been solved and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But the subset that Agoric is building with, they basically, like, for one thing, they've virtually banned the worst parts of the language, and the best parts you can just use. And so it starts to actually just feel like the simple language that I thought I was learning when I started. Like, when you first learn a language, you're like, oh, that's how you assign a variable and that's how you use it. Well, this must be how everything else works. And then they're like, oh, no, you didn't know about hoisting, or you didn't know about, globals, or you got to memorize all the globals because, you never know what global is out there.
One of the ways I characterize hardened JavaScript now is it's the JavaScript you thought you were programming in, right?
Yeah.
We turned off a lot of the things that were bad.
Very much like, once you look at the code on the screen in well-confined code, it's actually simpler because all the logic that's actually concerned is on the screen, and you can look at it and you can reason about it. And so it's really inviting to write small modules where it's just like, here's like the logic it takes to express a subscription. How many lines is a subscription really? It's maybe you could probably do it in like 5 lines if you had a good token primitive to build it on. And I think this is kind of paving this way for like lighter weight, more minimal, more user-friendly, readable code. And that's just one step on this path towards making kind of computing for agreements more human comprehensible in the first place. And of course, with AI and user experience and all that, there's a long way to go still. But even AIs benefit from having readable, usable, simple, safe languages.
Yeah, if I can inject here, a big part of that is, what does it take to be secure, right? You're not secure unless the humans actually know what the heck is going on. And so a couple of the elements, like, it is more programmable, it is more understandable what you built because, less code is easier to understand. But the other is the model that Dan talked about. And that usable security kind of goes into, again, why do you want to be able to extend the wallet with new user experiences? It's because you want to be able to have people understand what they're agreeing to. That consentful action that you talked about happens, goes back to the security model that we get in programming JavaScript, where my analogy is, if I want to grant you access to some file, I can go in and add an ACK list and add, Lex, and he gets access to file X and Y, but not Z, and all this kind of crap. And it's really hard. But if I just drag and drop, I just, pick up the file, drag it and drop it on the Lex icon. And now I have, as a convenient expressive action, also consented to give you access. And being able to add more richer user experiences that combine, the user action with authorizing the thing I want is something that, will evolve over time, but it'll really raise the game and raise the safety that we need for, more and more millions of people to get into crypto and use these new, richer, ownership experiences, if you will.
I want to still go back to that question around the broader audience of developers, but based on some of the things you've raised, I'm curious about what's actually going on, right? So how can somebody make MetaMask connect to Bitcoin and then separately build like a Unipass type stablecoin money movement application? Like, how much reach does Snaps allow for builders to have in the wallet? Because some of these things seem not superficial, but kind of like features, and others seem much deeper and more profound and really changing what the wallet's capable of doing. And what does that look like from the developer's point of view and their experience when they're building this stuff out?
So since we're basically using Agoric's hardened JS environment, we kind of get to define the environment we're making for developers. So we've made it a lot like the environment that Web3 dApp developers are familiar with. So there is a provider object. So you can request all the things you're familiar with if you've written for MetaMask users before. But then we also have several additional APIs for hooking more directly into the wallet in a few ways, whether that's exposing an API to websites, whether that's generating key material for you to perform your own cryptography with, or to present notifications to the user, or eventually we're going to have ones for adding assets into the wallet. That was one we didn't make the cut for V1, but is one we're very excited about. And then we're also working. We're very close to, by the time this airs, possibly having account extensions where you can have plug in new account types into the wallet too. So kind of having that foundation where you can run a script in the wallet, that's kind of step one. And that's what we spent basically years working on with Agoric. And then now that we have that, now we can kind of punch holes into parts of the wallet. We can say, oh, you know what? Providing transaction security, that's useful. Oh, accounts, that's useful. Notifications, that's useful. And in each one of those is now just an API. And so that's a lot easier for us to implement now that we have the whole extension system.
Unlike pretty much every other language on the planet, JavaScript, when a JavaScript computation runs, the things it's allowed to do are entirely circumscribed by what objects it's handed in, right? So in the browser, it's handed the window object and the document for JavaScript programmers like that, right? In Node, the global has on it FS for the file system and net for the network. And if your JavaScript program is evaluated with a global object, with this thing that doesn't have the file system, then you can't reach files unless someone hands you a file object. And so there's security magic there that's related to the stuff that Dan was talking about, right? They run an extension where it does not have access to the document and to the window, so it can't go and read the secrets that are your password as you type it in to a password widget elsewhere on the web page or elsewhere in the extension. Instead, they just can hand in this Web 2 object that has exactly the authority that they want to give that extension that circumscribes exactly what data it can get at and what functions it can invoke. And there's no way for it to express getting authority that it's not supposed to have. You just can't. I mean, there's no JavaScript you can write that says, go read the secret, because you can't open a file. You can only read the files that it might have given you access to. And that turns out to be really simplifying and powerful, because from a programmer discovery point of view, you can see what authority you've got. It's in this object they handed in, or in the case of smart contracts on Agoric, it's in the contract framework object that we hand in. It's exactly the same kind of architecture and approach. And it means you get the full power of the language, but just on the objects that we gave you. And that means that there's a lot less learning, and it's real clear, and all the tools can help you do command completion and show you what's available and all those kinds of things. And it means that we can also extend our respective environments over time, right? Here's the objects we're giving you today. He already talked about adding more encryption features or adding the ability to introduce new assets. And that just means that version 2 of that object in the future could have more authority, or they could provide a second object, just like, in the browser, you have both the window and the document. You could have the key manager and the, NFT manager if they had such a thing.
Agoric is also involved in the Cosmos ecosystem and across Web3. Your funnel must be aimed at developers that know JavaScript and can bring that skill set into blockchain. Do you have any observations sort of on that draw, on that conversion funnel? Like, where do you see people coming from? What are they interested in building? And how has it been recently? And where do you see things opening up?
So it is still early. Part of the thing that is from a Cosmos perspective, let me talk for just a moment about the MetaMask extension from a Cosmos perspective. Certainly, as Dan noted, there are plenty of other wallets out there, and there's some good ones in the Cosmos ecosystem. But the big thing that the MetaMask Snaps framework does, and in particular, the MetaMask Snaps built for Cosmos, is now, for great apps in the Cosmos ecosystem, and there are a few, and there are some being built on Agoric, what it means is now those apps can reach users that currently have a MetaMask wallet installed and don't have, Kepler or Leap or one of the Cosmos wallets. And that's really important for, the vision of Agoric, the vision of Cosmos has been this interoperable world of lots of different chains, taking advantage of different tech stacks where appropriate. And that interoperability underpinning is now pretty well spread and growing and getting more and more secure and more robust over time. But users can't cross that easily if they have to change wallet providers, right? If you have this awesome tool that can do, whether it's, a new perp market or can do nice incremental automated sales or, new kinds of NFT like Crya launched on the Agoric platform, that's really great. But if someone hears about it in the general public or in the crypto public, they go to a website, they launch the user interface that can talk directly to the chain, and then it says, okay, pay $5 in IST. I don't have a wallet that does that. I don't know where it doesn't connect to my assets. I don't know what I'm doing here. By having the extensibility of the wallet that they do have, i.e. these 30 million people that have MetaMask, right? Now suddenly all of those interconnected chains out there that we've talked about how interoperability will get them access, now suddenly they can smoothly go across them. And, interoperability is not just about being able to reach these other things, but being able to reach them transparently, right? You don't care as you bring up a web browser, whether you're going to a page that's running on, Apache or Express or some other website. You're just crossing multiple different networks and seeing a website that's rendered by some hardware. And the same is going to be true of Web3 users, right? The same is going to be true of users using applications that have Web3 technology underneath. They want to interact with that interesting, extensible, mutable NFT thing that gives them access to a story world. And the fact that that's built on Agoric, to a first approximation, those initial users don't care, right? They might dig in further and see other things that are available, but fundamentally they see this cool thing. They've got an NFT. It gets them into some story world that they're interested in. They add that to their pool of NFTs, some of which are on, ETH, some on Polygon, some on Stars Network, etc. And from their point of view, they just want to experience these things that are now available to them and not think about what tech stack they're moving among. And so that's the biggest promise of extensible wallets. Now, it is the case that MetaMask is probably it's probably the second, maybe the first now, the biggest source of showing people hardened JavaScript, right? JavaScript, as I said, hardened JavaScript is, the JavaScript you thought we were programming in. So it's a pretty straightforward for people to actually program in it. But what's happened is, with the sudden explosion of snaps being built, now we've got real experience that says, yep, they don't have any problem with it. JavaScript developers don't have any problem with it. And being able to point at, here's that software that we know makes the world, makes commerce better, and it's out there in Web 2 land, but in Web 3 land, being able to say, see, it's being used there, it's working just fine, and now you can build smart contracts on it. That's been a huge sort of lift. It makes some of the explanations and introductions to the Agoric platform certainly more straightforward. I will be at conference next week in New York for, telecommunications providers that are interested in Web3, right? And so, the value of having this integration really makes talking to the, Web 2 JavaScript developers, right, is as you say, it's Agoric's focus. But really, we start with Web 2 JavaScript developers interested in Web 3. If they've gotten very far in their interest, they've certainly heard of MetaMask and almost certainly used it. Being able to say, you program there, you extend out into writing your smart contracts, turns out they really like that. So, it's too early to have numbers and uptake, but it certainly makes many phases of that conversation just go much more quickly, where they now feel empowered to just dive in.
So I think that Dean, he did a really great job of explaining the immediate term benefits where it's just going to be easy to do this. And then he hinted at the big term play, which is people don't actually care about what blockchain they're on. And so while it may be a little convenient, to not have to have two wallets installed, you don't have to paste your recovery phrase into two wallets, but actually it's not that bad. There are apps that work with both MetaMask and Cosmos wallets today, like Secret Network, where you're bridging assets confidentially between Ethereum and Cosmos chains, and they work. It's just a little extra friction. But I think there are also some fundamental things that just can't be done when you have these things in kind of silos. And that starts to happen when you want to orchestrate or automate or, really integrate those assets together. So if you wanted to authorize an AI agent to perform some conditional logic on the two of them, in the background of your wallet, or if you had a new protocol that, let's say actually a scenario that I learned from Dean is the train and hotel problem. If you want to buy a train ticket and a hotel at the same time, like you don't want to get your train if you don't have a hotel when you get there. So you have to get two assets. But if those two assets are on two different chains, then you need to be able to create a sort of conditional term where two things are getting bridged onto some kind of, you could call it an escrow or a third party. It could be a chain, but it has to be a chain that both parties trust. So it's effectively playing an escrow role. And so you need some kind of interface that lets the user kind of combine these two assets into a single term that's now atomically enforced and then withdraws from the two. And that's just, that kind of orchestration really just screams for the ability to combine these authorities, or, ideally, I think expressed as two objects entering a function is about as simple as it can get. And so having the ability for a single runtime that can take those two authorities, make a contract between the two of them, execute on them, I just don't think you can do it with multiple, or you can't make that experience totally seamless and abstracted away. And so what I think we're partly doing is laying a groundwork for finally starting to chip away at abstracting away all of that interchain stuff, all of the, how many contracts and hops and sub accounts and relays and paymasters are you going through? And so this lets us start to like layer on the sauces to hide that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, end of the day, people want a smiley face in their wallet, for the amount of money they have to go up. I also think back to, I spent some time in law school, which was a special decision, but my favorite part of law school was learning about all of the workers' protection laws that came out towards the end of the 1800s in the US with, the building of the railroads all across the country. And there were all of these cases, all of these lawsuits, because you would have trains that either traveled on different dimension tracks, like things weren't standardized, or like trains wouldn't slow down. And so you'd have people who would connect moving industrial train cars together. They would, be at the end of one train and they'd have like some metallic hook that they would throw at the other moving train. And, half the time their limbs would go into the metallic hooks and there would just be disaster. And so there's a huge body of law in the US that coming out of this just mangling of human bodies for decades as the railroads standardized and got rid of sort of this manual connectivity on the infrastructure. And I'm so glad that in Web3 we have all these rails, but we don't have to throw people into the mix.
Not their bodies.
That
anyway.
long story had a point. We don't have to throw human bodies into the mix, but we still have to do everything manually, right? We have to switch networks manually, and we can end up in places that are fraudulent. We can connect to apps that hurt us financially, that deceive us. And so this is all kind of part of building that smooth infrastructure that is usable for the regular person. I want to switch tracks. I do want to switch tracks. Yes, nobody will be hurt during the switch towards thinking about Snaps as an app store. And I know it's not an app store in the strict sense, but I guess as an ecosystem, curious, Dan, to your thoughts around how you think it will develop. We have many analogies from Windows and Steve Ballmer's excitement for developers and software that they write, which made Windows so successful commercially. We have the iPhone App Store, which still has not really been replicated in its ease of use and dominance. In Asia, we've got Ant Financial, which was built out on the aggregation of merchants that all became part of the network and made that payment rail have billions of users. We now have also ChatGPT with its plugin ecosystem as well. So that there seems to be kind of this commercial move of opening things up in order to try to catalyze lots of applications, build out network effects, and kind of outpace the competition on features. How do you think about that? And what do you expect MetaMask Snaps to look like in the years to come?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the interesting thing about computers is the fact that they can do anything, right? And actually, I just listened to what Noam Chomsky on a podcast, and he was saying that's the thing that's interesting about human language and maybe thought too, is that we can have finite words for infinite concepts. which I thought was really fun. He got it from von Humboldt. And so if that's what's interesting about thought and about computers, and that was also the Ethereum innovation, then I think it's almost weird that we found ourselves in this eddy during the App Store year. Like, we're here 15 years into the iPhone era. And, you can have, there's millions of apps, but they don't really interact, right? Like the interaction is this deep link model, like you got a screen switch. So like per packet, there's a whole user interaction. So I think what we've been really missing is this kind of orchestration and interconnection of the software. And I think that that's the kind of stuff that the Agoric stack is great for, because what you don't want to do is just give everything carte blanche, right? And the reason the deep link model works is because you're bothering the user for each one, because interconnection is also vulnerability potential. And so the easiest way to add safety to that, as MetaMask well knows, is just ask the user, and kind of say, well, you may not be able to read it, but you've got a moment here where you can say no. So that's a very, very base level of consent. But then as we start to move up the kind of hierarchy of needs, the layer of abstractions, we can start saying concretely, okay, well, what are you actually willing to give that other process persistently, and so that it can continue to do things on your behalf? And that's a layer we don't actually have really great in the Snap system today, but I'm very, very eager for us to get it out ASAP. So I think that what you'll see is the first year or so of Snaps, you're going to see a lot of new blockchains and a lot of new account types. And so that's going to make onboarding into all sorts of blockchain ecosystems easier. And that's going to be great. And there's going to be a lot of new developers who are able to make new businesses. And that's going to be great. It's going to feel like a Cambrian explosion. But then we're going to release stuff that lets you interconnect these things and install them more seamlessly. And that's when this stuff is going to actually explode multiples, exponents beyond that. I really think interconnection is the secret sauce of Web3, of blockchains, of permissionless software. It's the thing that I'm ultimately, I think, the most excited about enabling.
That first wave, of just getting it to work for other chains is a really big step forward and provides that initial decoupling I talked about, where now you can start to innovate in the user experience without having to change every chain. But as you say, that second step of app-specific things. This is just an extension that lets me see a particular use case. Lets me see NFTs I'm using for ticketing, or lets me see just a new intense model. So it lets me talk about cross-chain things, where it's still very app-specific general service, but it's a huge step forward in user experience. I think that will be the first revolution you're talking about, Dan. The second one is the one that really comes out of the finer grained security model from the Agoric stack, from the hardened JavaScript, where just like with a file, it's not that I'm giving you access to the file system, it's I'm giving you access to this particular file, right? I'm giving this wallet extension access to these 3 NFTs and nothing else. And I can do that by dragging and dropping, or by something that is this consentful action, as you mentioned, that lets me have very easy but secure interactions with these services, so that, I'm giving a particular app access to the NFT that gets me access to a particular club, and now it can enhance in a permissionless way my experience with that club without being able to find out about all my other information, whether that's medical or financial or transaction history. And so that fine-grained thing is kind of that third stage, but people will start to be building that kind of thing in the next year, I think. And
to tie it to that OpenAI example, because I think OpenAI and the LLMs, they're the most exciting technology that's happened in, I don't know, maybe my lifetime, besides all the security stuff. It's just, it's just out of left field, way beyond, I think, a lot of people's expectations, what it can do. And so the extensions for it are very natural. It's very natural to want to connect it to absolutely everything. What can't benefit from some AI? But the first wave of their extension system is, it's basically you turn on an extension or you turn it off. And then that extension naturally gets the whole conversation, and they all see everything that every other one did. And so it's a completely flat authority model. And I think that there is an absolute upper bound to how much stuff you can do safely under that model. And so I think that these are incredibly complementary, and I'm really excited to explore AI in the wallet more. I actually did make an AI snap to start exploring this, but I think I can do even better on my next pass. It's a friend FREN.cc or .li. No, .cc. I wanted to do friendly, but I didn't register it in time. So, but it's like, you put an AI in your wallet and, not only now can you connect AI to applications you go to, but you can now power other snaps with your AI. And, my hope is this also gives you a tool for abstracting what your AI provider is, because, it's one thing if every site requires you to have an open AI account. It's another thing if they all require you to open a special subscription with them to pay for their open AI account. They're both forms of monopoly lock-in. But what does it look like for users to have their own trusted AI companion that gets that they can grant on a limited basis to services they use, while still keeping those services isolated from each other in terms of how much of the AI's knowledge they get access to? Like, those are, I think, really, really poignant questions that there's huge categories of AI potential that I think are only going to get unlocked when we start orchestrating them with safe, granular confinement.
And how much access the AI has is something that you also get to control.
I'm so pleased that we landed on that topic as our concluding one, because it's both fascinating, but I think also one of the most important roles that Web3 is going to play over the years to come, of keeping in check some of the failure modes of, what it means to give others full permission over your identity, over your money, but also your visage, your voice, your personality. And I think the capacity of Web3 wallets to actually own these things and have control over our AI agents is a really important topic. And we'll have you on next time to talk about it. So with that, Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Cool. Thanks so much for having us, Lex. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Lex. This is great.
Hi, everyone. That's it for this week's episode of the Fintech Blueprint. For more technical deep dives into all things fintech and decentralized finance, check out fintechblueprint.com and grab a free subscription to the newsletter. This is Lex, and I'll see you next time.